All right, can you guys hear me? Is this better? Let's see. You guys said it's cutting in and out. Is anybody else having any issues hearing me? Am I cutting in and out? I got some people saying that they can hear me fine. Okay. Um, well, like I said, we're going to go ahead and record this. So if you guys are having trouble, it might be your connection or something like that with your internet, but we're going to go ahead and get started. If you guys do have any, I know some people are saying that they don't have sound. Yeah, if you guys can close any other programs that you're not using right now. Um, I've closed my Outlook and my Internet Explorer and things like that. I'm just using the GoToMeeting application, and then I just have a few windows up of stuff that I'm going to share with you guys. And if you guys continue to have issues, if you look, you can actually call in. There's that call in number. So one option is you could hear everything. Okay, some of you guys are saying you can hear now. If you guys continue to have any kind of audio issues, go ahead and just call in to the call in number.
And this is Sarah Beck. If y'all continue to have issues, please feel free to private message me on the chat and I'd be happy to help.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, y'all, we're gonna keep it moving. But like I said, the deadline is next Friday. So just so you guys know, even though Friday is the deadline, you guys should get it in as soon as possible, Wednesday at the latest. I know some schools have already submitted, but as soon as possible, Wednesday at the latest. If there's any issues or anything like that, we need some front time to be able to work through that. And I'm going to go through some issues and questions that have come up this week a little bit later. But I just want you guys to understand that, you know, we really have to get this stuff done as soon as possible. We have to submit this information over to the DOE. They have to process it, submit this information over to OPB, and there are a lot of budget implications and things like that. Money is really tight. And just the way that a lot of the forward funding works, since it's not appropriated, DOE has to use a lot of their cash flow to be able to float us the money for you guys to operate for these additional kids until the midterm adjustment. So we would just want to make sure everything is as accurate as possible, and that we work through any kind of errors or anything. So and to give me time, you know, at this point in time, there's over 35 schools, and you know there's a lot of them that we have to go through. Luckily, we've created a process to be able to process them once everything is worked out, but it's just the front end stuff that we have to do to make sure everything's worked out. So the sooner y'all could get this complete, the better. Once again, that deadline is next Friday, but you want to have it complete by Wednesday at the latest. With that said, the theme of this roundtable meeting is kind of enrollment challenges. Now, the data collections template is a big thing. You guys are predicting growth and everything. There's kind of two implications of it. One is your funding. So you're projecting growth and everything to make sure that you're funded at the appropriate level. You're bringing new kids into the school, or you're a new school and you have all new kids. So we're trying to make sure that you guys are funded the amount of money for that. There's T&E implications. There's federal programs implications. We're trying to make sure that everybody's getting the money that they should be getting for next year. Money's going to be tight next year, and we're trying to maximize this as much as possible. The purpose of this meeting, one of them is just to kind of go through this thing. If you guys have any questions, we'll go through that stuff now. But the sooner that we go through this stuff, the better. If there's enough demand for it, we might fit one of these in on maybe on Wednesday or something like that for next week instead of Friday, just because the deadline is on Friday. But if you guys have any questions, it's important that you ask those questions ahead of time, you know, that we go through all this stuff and that you guys are able to submit. The other implication on submitting the dated template would be on your CPF score. So enrollment variance, on that FTE totals tab, which you guys will see here. We are comparing, and this is the FTE totals tab for, this is for all of our pre-existing schools, but it's the same for new schools. We're going to be comparing the numbers that you guys enter, this total that's up here. We're going to compare that to the to your October numbers. So in October, when you guys report that information that's reported on the data collections portion of the DOE website, we're going to compare your number here to there. So that has implications for your CPF score and particularly your enrollment variance. That's your ability to predict how many kids you're going to have. The reason that's important is because that's how you drive your revenue. If you can't predict how many kids you're going to have, you're not going to know how much revenue you're going to have. Therefore, you're not going to know how many teachers to hire, how many books to buy, you know, how much software licenses to purchase, things like that. So that's a really big thing. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the practical world. This is the world that you guys are living in. It's one thing to say that, okay, we have these kids enrolled, we got their GTID, we got their information, we have their IEPs and all this stuff like that. You guys are getting that information, making decisions about next year. Here's the thing, and that's why, thankfully, we have Craig Cason, who's the executive director at Du Bois Integrity Academy in Clayton County. Craig does a great presentation, and he's done one for some of our new student workshops. He's also done a presentation at our governance training discussing enrollment challenges. And the reason that we get Craig is not because Craig has a record that was always perfect, but because Craig and the staff at Du Bois, they had a lot of challenges at first, and they struggled on this. And they've learned to greatly improve their program and their ability to predict how many kids they're going to have, to make sure that those kids actually show up in the school, and then after that to keep the kids. And this is a process that, of course, is normally extremely hard. You guys know that better than me. But now we have additional challenges that are going to even make this more difficult, because you guys don't have the ability of having so many in-person meetings, whether you're meeting at churches or basketball games or baseball games or softball, whatever it is. You guys don't have the ability to get out there and meet these parents and see these parents like you used to, and have that face-to-face contact. So, you know, you guys are going to have to utilize technology and alternative means. But I just wanted Craig to kind of speak with you guys about, you know, managing some of those enrollment challenges. And I want to hear from you guys, like, what are the things that you're doing, like, you know, in this process, because this is very new. You know, I think it'll be really important for you guys to kind of share each other's experiences. And we'll kind of start things off with Craig. And Craig, if you could go ahead and start sharing whatever you have. Let me make sure Craig is unmuted. All right.
All right, Craig, you should be the presenter.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you. You can start sharing your screen.
All right.
To show your PowerPoint.
Okay, and I didn't actually load the PowerPoint up because I was more of a talking facilitator. So if you guys can continue to control the screen, I think I could facilitate a conversation with everyone that will be fairly simple, because Terrence said to keep it simple so that folks can understand. And so I think the first thing that I wanted to share is that, as Terrence has said, we are not perfect and by no means have the best solutions, but I wanted to give a couple of tips on how we have overcome some of the barriers. And I want to start by saying that our first year in, we were very low in terms of our academics and how academics and these numbers tie into everything else. When I say very low, we were last in the state and had the biggest red mark you could ever imagine in 2015 when we started. We've since then been able to turn greens on our academic performance, and all greens across the board now in terms of the CPF, including getting the last 2 years 10 points for the enrollment variance, just based on a strategy that we've been able to implement and put together. And so what I wanted to do, and then leave some time for some questions specifically, if some of you have, in terms of how you fill out your projection sheet that Terrence is talking about, the data projections, and give some real ideas about how to do that if that's needed, or if there's some people that have questions on that. Terrence can certainly put that slide back up that has that enrollment variance, and I could just tell you in simple terms how we do it. There's no magic to it, but for some of you who were probably lost like I was 4 or 5 years ago, that experience is valuable, and I know there are other people on this call that have the same experiences and can probably help as well. So I'm not going to consider myself the expert, but I'm going to consider myself to be a facilitator. And so the very first step I wanted to do is if you could outline 3 steps in this process. The first step is the data document, which is now due in May. The second step is leading up to your phase, leading up to when your school opens, between now and August or whenever your start date is. And then the third step is in October, when you actually do submit your FTE count. And you need your projection number in May to equal as closely as possible to your October number in the fall. So between those notions, this is where your work is to be done. First of all, when you submit in May, do not stop recruiting or marketing. Continue to gather names and people that are interested. One of the biggest lessons we learned is that while we have a set number of students on a list and a number we submitted to the commission and to the Department of Education, that you can best believe that all of those students will not show up in August. Now, you can do a lot of things to help facilitate that, what we call touch points, in keeping those parents and families engaged, but they have choices and options. And in their choices and options, they have continued to look at a variety of different schools and different selections. And also in this COVID-19 era, there are things that they would need to do and have challenges with. So you want to make sure you always look at those options. So when you fill out in May, it's very important that you have selections. And one of the things that we did on phase 1, which was the May selections, and thanks, Terrence, for pulling up that presentation, is there is a resource. If you're a new school, it's on the DOE website, and Terrence, you can speak to where they can find it, where you look at the template of your attendance zone, and you can see what success they've had over the previous 4 or 5 years of de-enrollments of students that attend and don't attend. And so for us, for example, we are a Clayton County footprint. So we went to the DOE website and looked at their withdrawal rates in Clayton County. We looked at their summer withdrawal rates. We looked at their grade level, class size, and their historical information, bus routes and walkers. And all of this can be found on the website of the DOE. And Terrence, if you could maybe tell them how to get to that tab, I think that would be helpful, and they can pull it up and look at it themselves.
Sure, I'll try to pull that up. I'll try to pull that information up.
Okay, so I'll keep talking while you try to see if you can get it and show it to you. But if you take that information, because you have no idea, for example, we know that in our kindergarten class, that if we project a certain number of student count, and there's a difference between the student count and the FTE count, we're going to be about 20 to 23% no-shows. So we have to overbook on our back office by that 20% so that when we get to October, that we'll still match the number that we submitted in May. If we went to May and just stopped and said, okay, we have what we need, it's guaranteed that when we get to the October number, we'll be 20% less. And we know that over based on our historical, but we had to get initial historicals from the Department of Education website because we didn't have anything to go by. But you can understand if you're in an area where you have more charter schools and parents have more options, that they could understandably look at 3 or 4 or 5 different schools, complete the entire application process for those schools, and still not attend your school come August when you open it. And you can say, well, we thought they were coming. One of the areas you can prevent that is by your calling, your marketing, your Zoom conference calls, your constant, what I call touch points with those families. And still you're going to have some fallout because they do have, and they might not tell you what their choices they're looking at, but rest assured, they have choices. If you're in a more rural area, you may not have that same 20%. Yours may be 5% or 12%, but there is some percentage of your students that will not attend, and you need to kind of be aware of that so you can, what I call overbook. It's like in the airline where they overbook the flights because they know some people will not come and catch that flight. Well, you have to intentionally do that, and you can't just pick a number out of the sky. You have to have a strategic plan as to what your number is per grade level, by class size, etc., and everything else. So that's going to be important that you always recognize you're going to have a percent of no-shows so that you want to take advantage of that. Now, what we do, we are ready to submit our document to the commission, and we've got the names listed. We've got the breakdown by segment so we know what those FTEs are. And we did it collectively with our entire leadership staff and special ed staff. And once we've done that, we know what the target is. We work conservative, but we know what number we've got to reach. And so therefore, on our enrollment list, while we may have turned into Terrence a certain number of FTEs, our actual enrollment list is going to be higher than that because of this percentage factor. That's important, particularly for the new schools, to know that even though you've submitted those names and numbers, you want to continue to enroll based on what you think your number is. One of the things we've learned that by the time you get to August and you have no-shows, then you try to go to your waiting list to get kids. That's more difficult to do. And newsflash for us, and I'm going to say this as delicately as I can say, one of the reasons in our first year we finished last academically is because we waited until we saw who didn't show up to go to the waiting list. And we went to that waiting list, we clicked it, and students had already started at other schools. So we got to the bottom of our list and we were trying to get students in, and those students that did come were the lower performing students overall by the time we got there. So we were able to make up for some lost numbers. However, our academic track record was very poor based on us waiting. So our objective is to admit those students early on. Futuristically, you want to move your lotteries up until February, March. You don't want to wait until later to attract those students. And you, on this slide, it talks about churches, community events in a normal setting. I do know that many of you have gone to virtual promotions and marketing programs to get your students. Your website is important. There's a great presentation that the charter school, the SCSC Foundation has done in terms of how you can be first on the website when people go to search your school and where you kind of put up on there. But we always try to do the grassroots marketing and put it together, and that's helped us to gain those bodies. If you go to the next slide, Terrence, and I could talk about where you want to actually be in terms of getting your butts and seats, as we call it, or your students Your marketing is important. I just talked about the website, talked about customer service. If you could go back to that one slide you had, your paperwork process, be straightforward and simplified, because we found parents don't like a cumbersome process where they've got to fill out 18 documents with their name on it. You need to have a personalized family communication plan, which between now and when school starts, you just need to be on top of those parents. We will take a calling bank and get our leadership team to call our new students. Just sending emails, it doesn't work. From my experience and our surveys we've done with our parents, they get inundated with emails. So the personalized communication plan, knowing the family, how many kids they have in the family, what they're doing, what they're going through, that works for us, because now those parents feel connected to you. And for this year in particular, you're going to have to put the plan in place, because they're going to know what their children are safe. We started last week with this, and some of the questions were, what are you doing for the fall? How will I know my children will be safe? What are my options going to be? And some of those things we had were unknown, but at least they know we're working towards it. And so, and it needs to be more than just your enrollment coordinator. We've elevated to our principal, our assistant principal, to myself, to ensure those parents that we're doing everything we can for their safety. You want to consider the families and their sibling priority, and calculate matriculation patterns into your student count. That's so important. And I know I've said it several times, but I wanted to make sure of that. And I can pause there, Terrence, to see if anybody had any particular questions. I could go over some examples of how we did the data collection spreadsheet and how important that is. But that was just some thoughters I wanted to throw out there to see if anybody else wanted to add to it. If there were some questions, perhaps we could answer, or at least from our experience here in terms of what we've done to make sure we make that number. So.
If anyone has any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat, and I will communicate them to the larger group. One thing that I did want to expand upon that Craig was talking about was around enrollment and enrollment deadlines. So something that I think particularly our new schools aren't aware of is you can actually cut off enrollment during the school year. It just has to be in your enrollment policies. So for example, we have a lot of more mature schools who will cut off enrollment for that school year after the first FTE headcount, and that is totally fine. They are within their power to do that as a state charter school. However, it is important to note that for first year schools, you're kind of lucky. You feel very fortunate and lucky to get anyone through the door. So a lot of times they won't cut off enrollment. But as you continue to mature with your school, you can get into a point where you can cut off enrollment. That can lead to some positive impacts on your academic scores as well, because you're going to be able to have those students the entire year and ensure that you've had them the entire school year. There are also some additional caveats around if you have a dual immersion language school. If you have any specific questions about that, please let me know, and I'd be happy to discuss that with you.
Okay, if there's any questions coming up, let me just share this with you on the data sheet that I made a note of. We've been able to meet the FTE requirement from our May or June presentation to the conference or to the DOE, and when our October count of FTE came in, but we now are paying more attention to our CPI as well, to your T&E, your teacher form, because even though we've done that, we still noticed a reduction in funds, and that was based on teacher certifications and years of experience. So we're learning that we've got to pay just as much attention to that tab in terms of being conservative and spot on, because you will get a funds reduction if that is not as accurate as you've reported. So you've got two tabs that are real important. One is the student FTE count, and the other is the teacher, the T&E tab, because that will cause you some fund reduction if you're not totally accurate. If you over predict in that area or over project, you will be cut funding, and we've experienced that. Even though we've met spot on the FTE number, because of the variation in our T&E reporting, we still saw a cut in our funding. So I just wanted to share that.
And that's a really important point, Craig, because as everybody is kind of filling out their data templates, it's important to know that if you guys are misreporting any kind of the special categories, that's EIP, that's special ed, that's gifted, any of those additional categories where you receive additional funding, if you're over-reporting in those areas, if you're reporting, thinking that you're reporting on a head count instead of on segments, or on FTEs, which are based on 6 segments, you'll over-report, and that's what Craig was just talking about. In some of the sections, you could over-report, even though your total number may be correct. You end up over-reporting. You get funded too much money, and what happens is you take a massive cut in funding later in the year.
And Terrence, if there aren't any questions yet in this section, if you put that other slide up, I could just go through the exercise that we do to report that FTE, and it may help somebody in understanding the segments.
Sure. In the current presentation?
Yes, if you could go back to your, you had a slide up for the FTE present to the schools, that your data sheet, you showed it earlier.
Oh, okay. On my sheet. Gotcha.
Yes, I could just go through one of those so that people know and do something simple. But so, Sarah, there weren't any questions then?
Did not get any questions through the chat box.
Okay. And then I'm just going to go through an exercise of what we did, and your schools, you can do it differently or however it is that you want to do it. But I'm gonna take the kindergarten program, for example, and I'm going to commute the segments. And you want to start with the segments, and then you want to come back to your FTE count. A student of 1 represents 6 segments. So let's say that I'm going to work with a number of 100 to make it simple. So if let's say you've got 100 students enrolled, and you know that when you sit down to the table and you now got to figure out how to do the FTE, how to fill out the chart that's there in front of us on the screen, and then come back to turning it into FTEs. And I get a lot of calls from other schools on how we've done it, and I just want to share that, and then Terrence, you all can add too. But if I set the number of 100 of program, and we started with 100 kindergartners, that segment's going to equivalent to 100 times 6. So you've got what is equivalent to 600 segments. And each segment you want to break down to equal what your 100 students are. So then across this spreadsheet, if you've got, of your 100 students, let's say that 10 of those 100 students receive some type of special ed services. And there are 2 segments for special ed 1, 2 segments for special ed 2. If you'll scroll over, Terrence. Now, this is not FTE, but you're going to say on your sheet of paper, in your what I call a working paper, let's say that you've got 10 students, and each of them has 2 segments in special ed. 10 students and they all 10 students is 100 segments. Okay. Well, let me say that 10 students is 60 segments, and of those 60 segments, you've got 10 of them get 2 segments in special ed 1. So therefore, you're going to add 2 times 10 is going to give you the equivalency of your segments in that special ed 1 would be 10 times 2 is 12, okay? Of your 60 segments, 12 of those segments are going to go to special ed 1, and then you want to divide that 12 by 6, because now you've got 12 segments. You divide it by 6, and that's going to give you the number of FTEs for your special ed 1. So that's 2 FTEs in special ed 1. So that's the way you have to do the math to get what my special ed 1 would be because of those students count. But I took the segments that were going to be in there, and then I want to come back to, if you scroll back over, Terrence, from my initial 600 segments that I started with of my 100 students, I have to subtract the 12 segments that I just gave the special ed 1. So I would take 600 segments minus the 12 segments, and that's what I want to have left for my general ed. You would do the same thing of segments for ESOL. You would do the same thing for segments for your other category of special ed. So you have to convert to your segments until you get to your division, and then what you have left, you then can come back and do your division to get your FTEs. So I'm going to say that out of the 600 segments in this, of my 100 students, out of the 600 segments that those 100 students represent, let's say that I take 100 segments are going to be to either special ed 1, 2, 3, 4, ESOL, or gifted. So that leaves me 500 segments for my kindergarten, early intervention, or regular program kindergarten. So I've already got 500 segments that 100 segments that are gone, and I've got 500 left. Now, the next thing is how many early intervention segments does that child get? And let's say in kindergarten, I project that I've got I'm going to say another 200 segments of early intervention programming, which means that some of my students are going to get 2 segments of reading and math, some are going to get something else, etc. So under that early intervention program, from my 500 segments, I'm going to take 200 segments and I'm going to divide that by 6. And Terrence, help me with the math on that so we get it correct. I don't want to confuse folks. But 200 divided by 6 gives me how many? I'll do the math, Terrence. I just want to make sure. Okay, so that's 33 FTEs that go into that kindergarten program management because of my division, 200 divided by 6. So on that line, I would put 33 FTEs for early intervention program, and that leaves me 300 segments left that I started with the 500. And so now I want to divide the 300 segments by 6, and that's going to tell me what my general kindergarten program is going to be.
That's a really good point, Craig. And for you guys, I know for your newer schools, you know, this seems probably new to you. But basically what Craig was just doing was, you know, when we're doing these exercises, you're not just doing it based on head count. The way that data collections work, and for you new schools who haven't gone through a data collection cycle, you should take, you know, your information for your students, and really you should be doing things on the segment level. And what segment means is that a day is broken up into 6 parts. How many parts of the day are they in, you know, special ed? How many parts of the day are they in gifted? How many parts of the day are they in a regular education program or EIP or whatever? So what you need to do is break everything into segments on your own spreadsheet, on a separate spreadsheet. Don't do this in your head. Yeah. And come up with your total number. Just like what Craig was saying, with 100 students, you're really talking about 600 segments. So whatever your actual head count is, you know, multiply that times 6. So you're talking about 600 segments. You're going to assign each one of those segments to an area. And when you're done, you're going to take each category. There's 19 of these FTE categories, as you can see here on the screen. These are FTE categories here. So you're going to assign the segments to each one of these categories. When you're done, divide it by 6, and that gives you your number of FTEs.
So, for example, in the example I gave you, of the 100 students that you had under that kindergarten program, the first column, there'll be 50 FTEs there. Under the second, which is the early intervention program, that's 33 FTEs based on a division. And that gives you the 300 segments. The other segments that we put out were divided evenly or divided into the special ed category, your early intervention, et cetera. So you want to work with segments on your spreadsheet, divide those segments by 6 as you get to each one, and that gives you how to fill out the form. That's my biggest thing is convert it to segments first and then convert it back, and that gives you your FTEs. So for example, if I had one student that has 2 segments in the early intervention program and his other 4 segments are in the regular kindergarten program, then that's how you get to those numbers.
Now, Craig, another question that's coming up with a lot of the schools is as you're going through the cycle, you've already got your enrollment numbers, you've already completed your data template and things like that. You talked about a lot of engagement points and things that you're doing afterwards. What specifically are you guys doing, given the COVID situation and everything that's going on? What exactly are you guys doing? I know you guys' engagement probably looked a lot different last year. What are you guys specifically doing this year with engagement?
Okay, so step 1 is we still call what are called touch points or communication points to the family. And we're doing these touch points outside of just an email. So we've required on our strategic plan to do 5 touch points outside of just an email. The touch point can be a phone call. A touch point can be a Zoom or GoToMeeting meeting. A touch point can be collecting some documentation or information, and we do that by appointment now at our administrative office, keeping social distancing separation. So out of the 5 touch points, one of those touch points is a come to our office or to the school by appointments, so that we can connect the dots with the documents, we can understand what your challenges are, et cetera. We found out that the more touch points that you do, the more opportunity those children have to attend your school. And I'm probably using the wrong word during COVID-19. So instead of saying touch points, we're going to say contact points. Okay. So the contact points are at least 2 phone calls for us, a Zoom meeting, 1 in person, and then 1 other type of contact point outside of just an email. And you spread those out. You keep a log of those contact points, and that leads all the way up till school starts, so that you get 1 in May, 2 in June, and 2 in July. And that gets you to the point where you're going to learn, well, I've decided not to come, or here's a question that I had, or here's anything, and you calculate that information and you pull it together. And our phone call, we've elevated, one of those phone calls is going to be from leadership team. So it'll be the principal, the executive director, the assistant principal, in addition to a phone call from our enrollment coordinator. So those are the things that we can do, are called contact points, and you want to have a strategic plan to do all those contact points so that you can learn if that student is still going to attend. They would not go through that process and not attend. At some point they'll tell you, I'm going to attend somewhere else, so that you can replace that student with another student.
Okay, Craig, we got a couple of questions. One of the questions is, I guess, concerning the data collection. What if you have done this incorrectly in the past? Because this is growth, how do we account for mistakes we made? For example, if we have current students that are EIP students but never accounted for that in the segments, can this be accounted for in any way? Now, with that question, it's really important that you understand that you're going from the purpose of the spreadsheet is to capture growth. Now you've added an additional layer of complexity to it, because now you're talking about manipulating it to the point to account for the mistakes that you've made in the past. I'm not saying you can't do this, but with the understanding that you've done this wrong in the past, you need to understand that you need to take great care as you're adjusting this, not to make any mistakes here because it could have a lot of negative repercussions from it. So with that said, if you haven't done your EIP, you basically have never listed your kids as EIP in the past, you have those kids now, just make sure you're shifting those segments. So if you're pulling segments from your primary education programs, that's your kindergarten, your primary grades 1 through 3, your upper elementary 4 through 5. If you are putting all of your FTEs in those categories and you think that, oh, we need to do early intervention for grades 1 through 3 or kindergarten or grades 4 and 5, you need to go and make sure that you're transitioning those segments from one to the other. So if you're going to do this, just make sure you're moving them from one to the other. It's okay to move it in this case. But here's the problem. This is what I'll see. If I look at your spreadsheet, and this assumes that you don't have any growth in your general education programs. If your kids are, and I'm going to use these numbers, I'm going to go ahead and put them here. You got 50 here. And let's say you're going to move some to early intervention, right? So let's say you're moving what accounts to 10 FTEs, not 10 kids, but let's say what accounts to 10 FTEs over here. So this is 10. As far as your growth is concerned, and actually the 50 really would have been up here in this blue area, but this is pre-populated, so I can't change that. So really what I would expect to see, assuming that this cell right here, the navy blue cell would have had 50 in it, I would expect you to put -10 there. That assumes no growth. So that's just an idea. What you need to consider is like everything needs to be balanced. At the end, when you go over here all the way to the right, or you go up to the top and you look at your total number should be how many heads you have. So if you got 100 kids, your total number should be 100. So if you're manipulating this and you end up with 110, you did it wrong. If you manipulate this and you end up with 90, you did it wrong.
And Terrence, if I could speak as well, this also depends on what you submit in your October FT, because the Department of Education will adjust your pre-populated number to what your actual October report was done. For example, we, in our year 3, we did not have any early intervention in kindergarten. When we made that adjustment, we just had to prove in our October number that we matched that up. So you want to make sure this projection is based on what you're going to be. You can't just make up early intervention because they're going to catch you in October if you don't submit it in your portal that you're supporting those programs. One of the areas that you can do, though, is over project in early intervention because you just put whole students as opposed to FTEs. Then you're going to get cut when they true up or when they come back and manage it. So your pre-populated number is going to be actual what you were paid or your haircut came because you over-projected. So that's where you want to start from, and your growth should come from there. If you go on the sheet and you just put in students and not segments, you're going to be off, as Terrence has stated. So you want to look what your pre-pop is done if you're an existing school, and make sure that you true up accordingly to what you feel you're going to have in October.
Yep, that's correct. So just make sure you're able to substantiate all your claims. Like Craig was saying, they do some testing and stuff over the summer. For the kids that they haven't already assessed and know that they would be part of the early intervention program, just make sure you guys can substantiate it. Just don't, this isn't where you go off at the top of your head and just guess or anything like that, because you'll end up paying for it. Now, another question is, and there was one question, I'm not from Dr. Nichols. I'm not sure. Can you rephrase that, Dr. Nichols? I wasn't exactly sure what you were asking. But another question says, there's only one category for English language learners. Does that mean all 6 segments of a student's day will be placed in that category, regardless of the severity of their ELL needs? Now, this is very important to know. The reason that when I submitted these worksheets to you guys, you know, the initial one that I said, where you guys have to complete this data collections template, when I submitted that email to you guys, on it, there were a bunch of attachments. Some of those came from DOE, and there was also a link on it to the DOE's website. The DOE's data collection website has tons of information.
Right.
So if you go to the DOE's website and you go to data collections and you go to FTEs, you're going to find information on each category and what are the limits. There are segment limits. I don't think, and I'm not 100% familiar with this, but I think in looking at this in the past, I don't think you could say that a student is ELL for an entire day. A lot of these segments have limits, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but majority of these segments have limits. You can find all that information on the DOE's website under data collections under these FTE resources. FTE resources, and you guys will find things like, now this is information you need to know for October, but as far as the FTE categories and weights, guidelines, you see here there's guidelines for special education, all kind of things. You guys need to understand this and read this. It will tell you what the limits are on each one of those segments. So
yes, and the general answer is the maximum I think is going to be 2 segments. In a lot of cases for us it's 1, but Terrence is right. Those segments, you're not going to be able to put 1 student in there for the entire time, because that's where you're going to be over. When it comes back, the FT will correct it, and where you might have put 6 segments in for that, they're going to correct it back to 2 and put the other over in general ed, and you're going to lose that money. They'll pre-populate that funding for you based on what you did, but when they collect it, they're not going to give you those extra segments. So you got to be very careful and know that there are limits to those segments. Please understand that.
Yep. And then it looks like Dr. Nichols clarified her question. Does Du Bois have a written plan we could review for recruiting and FTE? Do you have a written plan, Craig, that you could share with everybody? Or you could share it with me and I could send it out?
The recruiting plan is part of that deck that you can send that out. That plan, except for where it says touch points, you just need to change it to contact points, because I don't want to be, I'm not going to go down that COVID slide. So just make it contact points. That was a jargon or lingo that we use. So, but those points are in that slide, so that presentation. As far as the FTE, I can just tell you it's a work in progress. We now understand it. Dr. Nichols, if you'd like to call me or email me, which is on that presentation, I can set up some time. I'd be more than happy to go over it. We'll be working on Saturday, not on Monday, but next week early. You can let us know, and we can go through with your team. I've done it for a couple other schools. And once you get it and you understand it, it's 6. It's switching it to segments, doing the division, and then converting it back to FTE. So it's student count. Take your student count, put it to segments. Take the segments and put in those categories, and then do the division and come back to your FTE. So I can walk you through that. I don't have anything written on that. We just have learned what to do, basically.
And just so everybody knows, on the training portion of the SCSC website, you guys can find a lot of our trainings from everything, from the new school trainings we do to the governance training. As far as a great place to find great information, you guys can find it there. In addition, I just showed you the DOE's website where there's a ton of information about FTEs. You'll also find information on there about CPIs, and I've included a lot of the DOE's trainings from the data collections conference, which happened at the beginning of the school year last year. I've included those trainings on that email that I sent out with the data collections template. But before we run out of time, I wanted to make sure, do you guys have any questions concerning the data collections template? Is there anything going on as far as what you guys are submitting? I've had a few questions from some schools pertaining to, a really common one that I get is, oh, do we need to include all of our students? In kindergarten, technically all of our students are new students. Do we need to provide all of their names, or just the names because we're growing 10 kids in our kindergarten class? So the answer to that question is, in kindergarten, you don't need to provide all the names of your students. If your kindergarten class typically are if up here in this navy blue section, in kindergarten, if you went from 50 to 60, or you're going from 50 to 60, I only need to see 10 FTEs here in the light blue area. You know, there may be some exceptions based on whether or not they have special needs or something like that. But I would need to see 10 names. So if you guys are adding 10 kindergarten spots and you've enrolled 10 additional kindergartens, instead of enrolling 50 like you did the year before, you're now enrolling 60. I would expect to see 10 kindergarten names. You don't have to provide all 60. You shouldn't necessarily think of things as, oh, you know, in grades 1 through 3, we lost 20 kids, but we replaced them. So do we need to replace those new kids even though grades 1 through 3 haven't grown? No, you don't need to do that. Think of things as slots. We're just trying to account for growth here. So if you guys have 100 kids in grades 1 through 3, then and last year and then this year you're going to have 100. I don't need to see any additional names in grades 1 through 3. You guys are only capturing growth. I don't want to add any additional work. You guys don't have to substantiate numbers that you already have. You only have to substantiate new numbers. So if you guys are putting new numbers in this light blue area, you guys are only need to substantiate that, and that's what I need to see. Let's see, we have a question. Are there suggestions for determining SPED segments if you don't have the student's IEP for middle school? If you don't have anything to substantiate the segments, if you don't have an IEP, and if you don't have any testing that you've done yourself, you're just guessing and you're throwing numbers there, which you're putting yourself at risk of over projecting and being overfunded. Craig, do you have any suggestions on special ed?
Yeah, the only thing that you can do is go to the DOE website, look at schools that are in your attendance zone area, and they have some real data that shows their special ed population versus the regular population, and you could be conservative with that type of a research if you have nothing else to go by. So you would want to be very careful. If we project in our kindergarten special ed, we're saying probably based on our own data, 10% of that population, and that's real data that you can go by, but you don't want to be over populating in your special needs area. You're going to really have to wait till you get the IEPs done and know what you have. It's kind of dicey going out there as a projection as opposed to real numbers.
And you know, you just got to have something to back it up. So whether it's your ability to get into you know, guide or your information system or whatever it is, if you don't have anything to go off of, because charter school of choice, I mean, it's a roll of the dice, and really you're making a claim based off nothing, because we have schools that are in districts that have special ed numbers that are 2 or 3 times higher than the school. We have schools that have special ed numbers that are 3 or 4 times higher than their district. So, you know, right, it's kind of like, because you're a school of choice, you don't have without actually having contact with your parents, without having those conversations with them, without the parents maybe mentioning the fact that they were receiving special ed at another school, or however you capture that through your process. I would just recommend being really cautious and make sure that you could base that on something. The different special ed categories kind of vary. You saw there that there's special ed category 1 all the way up through 5 or 6. 5. I would just make sure, you know, the 4 and 5 are the higher funded ones. If you're going to make an assumption, and especially if you don't have a whole lot to back it off of, being conservative means making the assumption that it's special ed category 1.
Right, and Terrence, we do not do any projections off any of it. Our special ed categories we fill in are just based on what we have in-house and what our IEPs show, because that's a funding curve that becomes dangerous. We do a little projection off of the EIP for kindergarten because of trends, et cetera. But that special ed, as you articulate, I think is very true. You want to make sure you project off what you have in hand.
Yep. All right, any other questions from anybody about the process, about the data collections template, about marketing or anything like that? And while we're waiting for any last questions, I just want to say, if you guys have any questions come up while you're doing this, make sure you go ahead and submit those as soon as possible. I would try to, you know, I know this is a holiday weekend, but after the holiday weekend, I would really work on having all of this completed by Wednesday, so I could go ahead and go through all of these, make sure there's not any mistakes. Because typically when there are some mistakes made, maybe you didn't include enough names or something like that, I'm going to go down. So for instance, if you say that you have, you know, 100 students in grades 9 through 12 that you're adding an additional 100 students in grades 9 through 12, I'm going to go to this new student data. I'm going to look down here, or I'm going to look up here at the spreadsheet. I'm going to select grades 9 through 12, and it's going to tell me how many students you listed for grades 9 through 12, or actually it'll do it by each individual grade. And then I'm gonna look at that and I'm gonna say, okay, this only has 85, even though you told me 100. Well, I'm gonna go back here and I'm gonna change your number to 85. I'm gonna save it in an additional file, but I'm gonna change your number to 85. I'm gonna rename the file and I'm gonna actually adjust it. So just so you guys know, whatever you put in the FTE totals has to be the same number here. So if I go to FTE totals and I go up here and it says FY 2021 FTE growth 500, I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna expect to see 500 names. I'm gonna scroll down and Excel has a little count tool and I'm gonna check down here in the corner and I'm gonna see whether or not there's 500 names. If there's not 500 names, you're not getting credit for 500 students. So with that said, it looks like I don't see any additional questions. Thank you guys for your time. Thanks a lot, Craig, for sharing that knowledge with everybody. If you guys want to see those presentations that I pulled up that Craig did earlier in the year, both for the new schools and the presentation that he did at governance training, all of that is on the training section of our website. Especially you new schools, I hope you become really familiar with that part of our website because there's a lot of great tools there. Kristen has been putting together a lot of great training events for our schools, and a lot of the presentations and videos and things like that are compiled there. So Kristen and Danielle have done a really good job to compile all that information so you guys could just have a go-to place. If there's information that you guys don't find there, just let us know and we'll direct you all into the right place of where you can find that information. So with that said, I hope everybody has a great holiday weekend and enjoys the 3-day weekend. I hope you guys get a lot of rest. And if you guys have any questions or anything, I'll be monitoring my email. We're off on Monday, but if you guys have any really important questions, I'm gonna try to monitor my email and you know, see if I can shoot you guys a quick answer or something like that if that's possible. If not, we could set up some phone call time. We could set up some screen share time. Whatever we need to do, just let me know ahead of time. Once again, we're trying to do all of this before Wednesday. All right, with that said, everybody take care. Thank you.